Welcome to the Greybeard podcast, where you're going to get, which we know because we know this story, the most insightful, least hyperbolic information about the war that's occurring in the Persian Gulf or Arabian Gulf, whatever you want to call it. Between the three of us here, I'm Mike Boettcher. That's Ken Campbell. And that's Bob Sands. Between the three of us, we have a combined 150 years of experience with warfare, with terrorism that's both domestic and international, and in intelligence and intelligence analysis, Mr. Ken. And while we've all been asleep, Ken has had the vacuum cleaner on, looking at all possible resources around the globe to tell us what's going on with the war in the last 24 to 48 hours. And to me, Ken, it looks like there are two major things going on. We had the infrastructure war against oil infrastructure, which is driving gas prices through the roof, and natural gas prices. And we have the closure of the Straits of Hormuz. But today as well, there's a wild card. We'll get to that first. But what about this infrastructure war, Ken? I mean, does it look like it's diminishing a little bit, or is everyone still going after everyone's refiner?
No, I think at this point that will continue, although we've all been watching the news and seeing the back and forth discussions presented by the Israelis and our administration specific to hitting the natural gas fields and production facilities in Qatar. That alone caused a major spike in LNG prices. I believe it was yesterday, 35% increase. And then, just caused everything else to go right on up too. So I think Iran has an upper hand here. They've weaponized, fossil fuel resources to an advantage. And quite frankly, while they have suffered, quite a bit in terms of military losses, they're still able to field short-range and medium-range ballistic missiles that can range facilities across the GCC countries. Of course, there's the specter of Iran going ahead and mining the Straits of Hormuz, which is, I think, many of those who will listen to the podcast probably understand now. Mines make ship drivers very nervous, and they cost owners and operators tremendous amounts of sums in terms of insurance. And then there's the reinsurance industry that is also taking a hit. And then that all trickles down to higher costs at our pumps, higher costs at our grocery stores. One of the things that I'm sure we'll get to, Mike, is the discussion about how this impacts agriculture, given that in addition to all the oil, we have all the basic ingredients for, fertilizers.
Yeah.
Coming out of the Persian Gulf region and transiting through those straits, which
that's where Bobby and I come in, because we're in the middle of the agricultural region. Just so you know, folks, I'm in Oklahoma City. Bob's in Oklahoma City. I teach at the University of Oklahoma as well. Bob's still reporting here in Oklahoma City and has for, longer than Oklahoma's been a state.
So not quite that long, but you're getting close.
What are the farmers saying out there, Bob? Because you guys are reporting on that.
There were several reports just yesterday that I found very interesting. And probably chief among them was major criticism from within the USDA itself, from the chief of staff at the USDA, about the Farm Bill. And that all that Congress and the president are doing is throwing a big wad of money at it, and they're not addressing the real issue. Farmers are going broke. I think we had, I don't want to quote the figures because I don't have them in front of me, but a huge number of farmers went under in Oklahoma last year already, and they're increasing now. This is a real serious matter. They can't afford fertilizer. They can't afford diesel fuel, which that's their lifeblood. Everything they own runs on diesel. They can't get into the fields to do their work because they don't have the fuel. They can't afford it. So it's really putting a crunch on the agriculture industry. They're really taking a hit right now. And they're very upset with the White House for its policies.
Yeah, Bobby, if I might, I just have a question, Bobby, is that, right now, we've been at this now, we've seen this go on for 3 weeks, and all of the damage and everything that's really visible beyond some of the price increases we're seeing, is in the battle space. But how does this impact things 6 months from now?
Well, that's a good point,
from your
because
perspective on
right, the projections I've seen from the International Energy Administration is that gas prices are going to remain high all the way through this year and into next because of what's happening now, and of course the damage to infrastructure, the energy infrastructure that's occurring. It's going to take weeks and months, actually, for just the energy markets to settle down. So this isn't going to end anytime soon. If we ended the war today, the impacts are going to be felt for the next 6 months at least, if not longer.
So we're looking at continuation of inflationary
Yes.
prices, no relief on things like interest rates and that sort of thing then, yeah?
Yeah, that seems very apparent from the comments that the head of the Federal Reserve made recently. It's very clear they don't want to do anything right now because everything is upside down. Everything is in chaos, and so to take any steps on interest rates could just be a disaster right now. So everything's kind of trying to freeze in place except for the inflation rate. That's going up.
To me, when the Trump administration decided to launch this war, this is an example of, the law of unintended consequences, because you launch a war in the Middle East to, according to current defense officials, to Iran's nuclear capability, which we thought we'd completely degraded last year, and to go after their ballistic missile capability. But one of the big consequences in this country, and especially where we live, that war will very likely, and this isn't hyperbole, mark the end of the small farmer in this country, because they can't, unless this thing ends quickly. We're heading to planting season. Diesel's up. They're already on, a razor's edge, tipping either towards bankruptcy or just barely getting through like they do every year. And I know I grew up in farm country. My dad farmed wheat. So I know that this is a day-to-day thing for them. You're just figuring it out and trying to survive till the next year out there. And that's what it looks like to me, that it could be the end of this, small local farming businesses out there in America.
That seems very apparent, Mike. One of the other things that was interesting from this article involving the USDA, the point was made that well over 85% of all of the funds that are going to farmers to help them is going to big pharma, big farms, not to the little guys. It's the corporate farming organizations that are getting the vast majority of this money. People could argue they don't even need it, but that's where the cash is going. So not only are they in a bind, but they're not getting the lion's share of the money. So your point is well taken. This may be the end of the small farmer.
Yeah, why does that not surprise me? I was watching a newscast this morning in which reporters were interviewing fishermen down in Florida, and they were saying that the cost of diesel is such that it's impacting what they can do and where they can go. And in particular, there was an interview of a fisherman, captain of a boat that was getting ready to go out to get swordfish, which is something that I think many of us enjoy, and in addition to all the other good things that come from the sea. But that boat takes 4,900 gallons of diesel. Do the math. It's gone up, I don't know, a dollar a gallon, maybe more, $1.50 gallon. Usually marine fuel is a little bit more expensive for a number of reasons, the least of which is you're operating those pumps in an environment that is very, very restricted, and so there's certain things that have to go into it. So they put a premium on the fuel, right? But the bottom line is they ain't got the money to fill up their boats to go. There goes the shrimp out of South Carolina. Bubba Gump would be pissed.
And through all of this, you can forget, as we're talking about agriculture, that, this is happening because of this war going on. There is no anymore a war that just affects a region. A war in the Middle East affects the whole globe, and we're seeing that. And Ken, in the last 24 hours, anything jump out at you in the sit rep in the theater of operations there now?
Well, I think in terms of the attacks, what's going on are is similar to what we've already seen. So drone strikes, short range and medium range ballistic missiles on our side, from what I can discern from media reports and looking at what's publicly available on, for example, the U.S. Central Command website, we're continuing to do precision strikes against military targets, and that's ongoing. One thing I will say from my experience in Desert Storm 1, 2, and some of these other places that, Mike, you and I have both been, and Bobby, you've monitored and helped collate information for this kind of reporting, is that in particular mobile missiles are really hard to get after, even today with the advances that have been made in technology for auto object detection and classification, say in imagery and the full motion video imagery coming off of the the various drone platforms and whatnot. So, it's a whack-a-mole fight on that end, but as we can see from the continuation of attacks by Iran, we're not cleaning it up. Their open source reporting suggests that inventories have been nicked. This is outside of what they've been used, but, they came prepared. They've been stockpiling this stuff for a long time, and they still have production capabilities.
Haven't they been stockpiling also and really reinforcing what they've got at the Strait of Hormuz? And that hasn't been hit at all, has it? Or has it?
There have been strikes against the port facilities in I believe down in, what is it? You've got, not Boucher. I don't have a map in front of me, and I'm brain farting on the number of ports and then naval facilities that are there. But yeah.
Well, we're gonna, as we develop this podcast, we're gonna get very cutting edge technically here and throw up graphics and maps. So yeah, no, we'll do that. Yeah, no, we'll get to that. But one of the things that struck me in the last 24 hours, and I think is highly alarming, is that Iran tried to hit Diego Garcia, the British and American bases there, deep down in the Indian Ocean, approximately 2,500 miles from the center of Iran. Now, before, I think we thought that the max range for these Iranian missiles was about 2,500 kilometers, which would be more like, what, like 1,100 miles? My conversion's not very good. And I think this is a game changer in this whole situation, because we operated under the assumption that Iran couldn't hit most of Western Europe with their missiles. And now it's very likely that they could hit London. But we were talking about this earlier, Ken, and you're not as concerned about that as I am. Well, explain that.
Yeah, so.
And plus, people, just so you know, Ken has kind of like been involved in like everything. Missile technology is one of his expertises. And, he's called the Beast for a reason. So, okay, Beast, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was coming at it more from a, ordnance engineering perspective, where, we're looking at developing a system with a certain spec and a capability. When we produce and and then go to manufacture and then go to production, those weapons are really well tested and whatnot. And so when I look at a table of capabilities and I see, the range statistics and the circular error probability and this sort of thing, I'm also considering, how sophisticated is that guidance system? What are the percentages of this, that, and the other? That said, with Iran, and I think, Mike, this very, very well, good is what's the term? We don't need to be perfect. We just need to be good. Let's go. And they'll use it, and they'll use it, and they'll use it, So it's not that I'm dismissive. I think in my thinking, our initial conversation, it was like, they can launch it, but I mean, one of those two missiles headed to Degar failed in flight, and the other one was taken down by an SM-2. What does that tell me? It tells me that there's still a lot more test and evaluation that needs to be done with those missiles. But hell, Mike, they got a whole range, a whole inventory of other systems that are curated and can range, 1,500 kilometers, 2,000 kilometers. When you get a chance, go and just scan that table that I sent you in the ballistic missile this morning. The bottom line is, if they have it, and it's sort of kind of operational.
Well,
They'll
this would
use
be
it.
in the Kormchar family of missiles that they have. This would be Kormchar
Yeah.
4 that was rumored. Is that right? I think that they were working on. And those are liquid fueled rockets. Is that right?
Yeah, those are liquid fuel rockets, which means that
So,
they have to be, usually they're stored empty when they get out for deployment. And I'm not an expert on, their mobile missile launchers and this sort of thing, Mike. I started to get pulled into this, as you know, and we can talk later about a need to report responsibly on what's going on. So all disclaimer, I'm not specifically an expert in all the Iranian threat weapon systems, but what I can tell you about liquid fuel systems, you typically don't keep those stored with the liquid fuel in them. You fuel them up right before you use them. And that requires you to use two separate liquids, if you will. One is a liquid oxidizer and the other is a fuel. If you think about an oxygen source and a carbon source, right? And that stuff's, it's messy to deal with. So getting back to it, yeah, that missile's got some range, but it's using older technology to power it. In the grand scheme of things, I don't know that it matters, unless we're taking them out. Because when we take out that system like that, it makes a huge fireball.
Well, I would think it would matter, because if you're going to have a liquid fuel and they got to pull it out of the tunnel or the cave or wherever the hell this thing is, it takes a few minutes to fuel that thing up. We should be able to spot that with our satellites. So those are liquid fuel missiles are vulnerable. But I'm just wondering, to me, and I think you're going to hear, knowing how reporting goes, and that's where I live, you're going to be hearing a lot about how did the intelligence community underestimate Iran's ability on missiles? And if they underestimated that, had they underestimated the timelines we had for their development of a nuclear weapon or enrichment of uranium? And so, a lot of the assumptions, I think it's, in a way, it attacks all of the academic research and military research into this, that, hey, they've had this missile, and
so can I be
no longer is Western Europe safe?
No, I understand, the concern, and your comments are not to be taken lightly here. But what I will also say, and we can get into this particular topic later in another session, but the intelligence community, particularly the defense intelligence side, is principally there to inform the combatant commands and the operators, right? And they call it as they see it, and they're really, really good. The problem is when it goes further up the chain, past the joint staff and up to the administration, my sense from what I'm seeing is that bad news doesn't want to be accepted or considered. So, for example, the Defense Intelligence Agency put out a bomb damage assessment report against the Iran nuclear facilities last summer, and it was published. And shortly thereafter, the director of the Defense Intelligence Agency was terminated, because it was bad news. It wasn't news that was consistent with what the administration was putting out, which was that they had completely obliterated the capabilities. Now, to that point, Netanyahu is now talking about how the capabilities, the Iranian capabilities for building a nuke, are now gone. And that's come out in the latest reporting overnight. So it's really interesting, the storylines that keep getting pitched. And, I think you all saw the report I generated on the rationales that have been given over a period of weeks as to why we're doing this, and they've changed. They've gone from strategic to this to that to this to this to this to this, and it's not coherent, and it doesn't really factor into a good coherent strategy, which is why we find ourselves where we are today. If, for example, CENTCOM and Naval Forces Central Command knew what was in store in total, I don't think that the 4 mine countermeasure vessels, the older vessels that were lifted out of theater about 3-4 months ago, would have been sent home. And those are being replaced by littoral combat ships that have new mine warfare technologies. But those old vessels had been based in Bahrain for years and had exercised in that environment and this sort of thing, and also worked with the Eastern Saudi Navy, the Eastern Fleet. And you're talking to the guy that wrote the Forces for Change document back in 1993-94. Get mine countermeasure vessels permanently stationed in the Persian Gulf. And I did that when I was on Admiral Doug Katz's staff at the nascent Naval Forces Central Command U.S. Fifth Fleet. And I can tell there's a story there, like there's always stories. That one could be a funny Netflix thing. But anyway, I'm blathering on here.
Yeah, let me write this
Yeah.
down. Netflix possible series. Yeah, anyway, go
Whee!
ahead.
If I could ask a quick question, Ken, and you too, Mike, what is your opinion of why we've got 9,000 plus ground troops in the area?
Can I be
What are we gonna do with
sarcastic with my answer real quick? Because I
you?
need.
Yeah.
You do whatever you wish.
Because he can.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, hey, look, you're talking about Iran. I don't think Americans realize how big Iran is. Iran basically is the size of the entire Midwest of the U.S., going from Minnesota to Texas. And if you look back to a war I covered, Desert Storm, back in 1991, first President Bush, Daddy Bush, put together a coalition of 500,000 troops to go in and take a country the size of Kuwait, which is tiny compared to Iran. You're talking 9,000 here. So you got to go forward, I think, with the assumption that this is for a smaller operation. And, the speculation you see out there is, taking Karg Island. But I don't think it's that, because you're in the range of Iranian artillery and everything else and drones coming in. You'd have, 9,000 Marines fully exposed to constant bombardment with no present there now, no anti-missile or anti-drone capability. I'm sure they'll bring it with them. Or they're looking at further down the Gulf near Hormuz and looking at those various islands there. You have those different routes of passage. The Iranians seem to be moving their shipments that they're allowing to pass. And I know Malcolm Nance, who does Black Man's Spy podcast, which is also, a very good podcast on this, calls it the Iranian Easy Pass, like it's a turnpike. And so they're routing them further north along that border. For some reason, it could be maybe the straits are already mined. Who knows? But I'm not sure what effect that 9,000 troops could have by taking some of those islands. And then, but, there are forces that are an ace in the hole. 3 weeks ago, we were talking about the 82nd Airborne canceling an exercise they had, and the speculation was they were preparing for deployment somewhere in that theater of operations. I just don't think that in this war, my opinion, having been in a lot of wars and seeing this, is that a ground force of that size can make much of a difference there.
Bye.
Yes. Beast,
Hi, honey.
I'll call on you.
Yeah, so no, I agree. I would hope that the planners, have got their shit in one sock with regard to the reason rationale for surging the troops. There's the obvious one, which is we're going to put more visible capabilities there and to provide a psychological stressor, right? But there are some certain realities here, and Mike, you I think nailed it. You don't want to put those troops out in a area that can continue to be targeted by these short-range ballistic missiles and certainly artillery and whatnot. One of the things that we can get into maybe later is, what are the capabilities of the IRGC Quds Force, and then their National Guard pipe-swinging, police, the besieged. And my gut tells me that, going head to head with our troops, they're going to turn and run. I don't think that you're going to see a lot of stand and fight. That said, something like that would be messy as hell. And they put boots on the ground. We're going to see more bodies coming home and more of the dignified transfers. And I don't think anybody wants to see that.
No,
No.
I don't think so either. And Bobby, I mean, politically back here in the U.S., that's always a major factor in a war America gets into, is the politics of it. And I'm not sure we've had a war before that started with most of the nation opposed to it. It's always been a creep to the negative side of the scale, whether it was Iraq or Afghanistan, or going back to World War II. There was a time when the war was going on in World War II where Americans weren't buying bonds, and the American government had to do something. And in that era, they had to be really transparent with the American public about the toll the war was taking, and we needed those war bonds to fund World War II. And so, for example, the operations in Italy against the Nazis and Italians, finally, those images of American soldiers and coming ashore in Italy and the bodies floating in the sea and, the dead, which were banned, were shown at that point. I say all of that because this is one of the factors that obviously the Trump administration is weighing politically. How long can we go on this? And do we use ground troops? And because that's going to greatly increase the casualties and vulnerabilities. And frankly, I don't see a use of ground forces in the theater of operations there that would be effective. But I don't know. I'm not a military planner. I've just been on the receiving end of military planning for decades. So we're going to talk more about all of this, but rest assured, yes, Ken.
I have one question for Bobby. Overnight reporting talked about the administration, the Department of Defense, for requesting a $200 million augmentation to the war chest budget. What would that $200 million do for the farmers across middle America?
Oh, that's a very good question, because they're not happy about that, just like a lot of people in Congress aren't happy about it. Democrats and Republicans both, even his biggest supporters, the president's biggest supporters in Congress, are asking questions. What is this for? What are you going to use all this money for? There was even some speculation that the $200 million was to top off the budget request that defense originally had, which was $1.5 trillion. Their budget's right at $1 trillion already, and now they want $200 billion more. It would make a huge difference for farmers. It'd make a huge difference in healthcare. It would take care of many, many, many things.
Why are we not spending to make America great again?
Yeah, that's a very good question.
Well, I mean, and frankly, that's the fracture you're seeing in MAGA right now.
It seems very clear in economy.
Yeah. Hey, Beast, you've got your company, BeastWorks. You're out there putting out daily assessments of really interesting things. How can people access that?
Well, right now, first of all, just a little background on this. I started generating reports and using a variety of generative artificial intelligence engines and whatnot, take advantage of the power there to locate, refine, assess, reassess, and to do it in a fairly automatic fashion. But, I wanted to do this because I was tired of listening to pundits and news story reports, newspaper articles that just scratch the surface of these issues and what's happening. I wanted something that would still be reasonably digestible, but also rich in detail and have a methodology statement. How did I get from A to B to C? What were the sources used? We all talk about fake news and this sort of thing. And the one thing I didn't want to do is send stuff out that didn't have a section that talked about, how I'm getting this information and how's it being put together, and then just put it out there as a responsible thing to do. I just felt, I mean, Mike, me, I've been, since I was 17, that's when I joined the Marine Corps. And my last combat support tour was in Afghanistan as a senior civilian, in a temporary senior role, 2017, 2018, and I didn't do those things later in my life, like, when I turned 60 in 2017, because I wanted a hoo-yah. I did it because it's necessary, because I have experience, and that experience was needed. Same reason why I'm publishing this. At the moment, I'm putting it on my LinkedIn page. You can find me at Ken Campbell on LinkedIn. And I'm putting it there, and then I'm sending it out selectively on, depending on how people want it, via signal attachment, or, text or email. The idea is that, working with you guys, we formalize this and get a place to hang it. Maybe we get a website going or something like that. But it's being fairly well received. I'm not getting blasted with criticism. So, I'm going to continue doing it.
Well, I think that all three of us have worked together on a lot of different things, like the Oklahoma City bombing and terror groups, domestic terror groups. We've worked on international issues together, Afghanistan, Iraq, all sorts of various things all through the years. And that's why we're all doing this, because, we're old dogs. We're graybeards, but we are old dogs that like to learn new tricks. So we're utilizing everything we can, the power of artificial intelligence combined with our own experience to try to give you an assessment of where we think this thing is going, because we've seen a lot in the last half century, and that's where we're coming at you from. We're not going to feed you bullshit. We're going to tell you what we think. Everything from, and we'll get into this in other episodes down the line on the real guided missile that is dangerous that Iran has. Those are terror cells spread across the globe that are often run by proxy groups that are loyal to Iran. So that is what we plan to do. You agree, Bob?
I agree very much. In fact, what you just mentioned will probably be the subject of our next podcast.
Okay. Well, we'll get into this. Come back to Greybeards, and we'll be back at you daily, giving our assessment of this war and trying to give you the best assessment and information that is out there, open source. And just keep in mind, as Ken keeps reminding us, and I've heard throughout my whole career, over 90% of what intelligence agencies make their assessments on are open source information that's out there to the public, that's published. Probably well over 90%. And then the rest are, secret technologies we have, everything from satellites to other ways of listening and monitoring to human intelligence. We don't see that unless it's leaked. But by far, the majority of the information comes from open source. That's what we're dealing with, and we're going to give you as complete of a picture as we can. So until next time, Beast, Bobby, we'll talk. Keep looking, man. Keep getting that vacuum cleaner going.
Yes, we will.
Digging out everything we can,
How do you
domestic
do
and
that?
foreign. Same here.
How do we
I
do
don't
that?
know. This is it. I'm a
Whatever.
college hind. They do that all the time. Okay, guys. Talk
All
at you
right,
soon.
see you later.
Right.
Bye. So we went twice.
Okay, Mike, you just turned yourself off. Bobby, you still there?
It's okay. Well, Ken, it's always good to see you, buddy. It really is.
Yeah, this is going to be fun, man.
This is fun. I enjoy